So now we'll take a look at how we can add some effects, load effects in, and start adding them to various different sound slots. I've got a group of sounds loaded with some pattern. And so if we go to our pad mode, various different sound slots there, triggering some one shots. And there's a couple of ways we can get into that plus, or the add plugins and add effects. And one of them, say if we have our kick drum selected, I can just hit the plugin instance. And then once I'm in the plugin instance, I can use the 4-way encoder to scroll to the right and then get a plus button. And I can hit on, then press down on the encoder, and then I can add an effect in here. The other way to access this page would be to use the, say, whatever, I'm trying to sort of exit that section of the hardware now. So we're over in our effects, and I've got my snare, say, selected. I can go to Shift Browser button, because you notice it's the browser button, but when it's also plus plugin. So if I go to Shift, it becomes plus plugin, and the options are slightly different from going to plus plugin as opposed to going to plugin, because in plus plugin I can scroll to the right and I do the exact same thing as when you go in the plugin options. You have plus and then you can add an effect, but in the Shift, the plus plugin option, I can actually change the source of the sound. So at the moment it's a sampler and it's a one shot, but I could load a drum synth in here, or a bass synth, or I could start to load something else, you know. So at the moment, previously it was on internal. So internal is all the Machina instruments, which is the sample, and these are all drum synths here, and then a bass synth. But if I go vendor native instruments, I can then just load a native instruments synthesizer, Massive for example, or I can start scrolling through whichever plugins or instruments you have installed here. So I can go into the Audio Realism and load the ABL3 for example. So that's the difference. That plus plugin, I can change the instrument basically, whereas the plugin instance, it's just bringing up the plugin instance. It's telling me I've got a sampler loaded in here. I can start editing some of the sampler stuff, you know, use the envelopes and whatnot, or I can scroll to the right and add an effect. So two ways to get into effect. So let's go to, say, plugin instance, bring that into focus, and we look through all our sounds. It looks like nothing's changing there, but it is showing us the different, you notice the name is changing, clap. And then we can scroll through. We can see here this kick, we have a filter loaded onto the kick. So let's go to that snare and let's add a reverb. Select the snare, click on the plus button, and then I can scroll down using this encoder here, add a reverb. And then hi-hat, let's do the same again. Scroll to the right, plus, let's add a delay. Let's add an effect onto here, and again we don't have to go into the plugin instance. So if you're on that, I could go Shift plus plugin, and then I can add, what should we add onto here? Distortion maybe, as an example. So we can add effects in that way, and then once you bring an effect up, you've added it, you get all your parameters for changing the effect. So, you know, make a really big reverb, change the delay time or the feedback. So let's go ahead now and, well, we've got our plugin here, our reverb effect and our snare. There's a couple of more options that we can do. So let's go and scroll to the right, because we've got the reverb selected now, we can actually add more plugins, more than just the one effect to a single sound. So I go scroll to the right and get that plus icon in focus again, hit that, and now I can load in something else. I could load a lo-fi onto this snare now. I could go ahead and, you know, you can keep adding more effects. So I could add a phaser, and you can see I've got these 3 effects now. And if we hold shift, we get a couple more options. So with the phaser in focus, I hold shift, I can now bypass it, so the phaser is turned off. I can go over to my reverb, shift, bypass, turn the reverb off. I've not got rid of it, I turned it off. If I want to get rid of it, I get the remove option, so I can remove that reverb completely. Go back to my phaser, shift, unbypass that, you know, scroll, plus, very quick to just start building up effects. Add another reverb, and if we want to change the order of effects, we can also do that. So hold shift, we have our move, so the reverb is after the lo-fi and phaser. I can move it to before those 2 plugins or effects now using this move button. So with the reverb in focus, left, just I've swapped it there with the phaser. I could put it before the lo-fi, move it back again, you know, so lots of options for adding effects and bypassing, removing, changing the order. So that's adding the effects at sound level. The distortion is a bit much, so let's bypass it. But what if I want to add an effect to all of the sounds within the group? Because I'm adding them at sound level, and this is quite important for understanding the machine and terminology and how you're affecting sounds, is that essentially we have 3 levels that we can add effects to. I've added effects to the sound slots, but we could also just add an effect to the whole group. And you notice I've clicked on the group there, and we actually have some effects in there already. So sound slots, we get to our sound slots, hit that sound button. We click on the group button. We're now at group level. So group level is different. Sound level is individual sounds. We get 16 sounds within a group. The group is all of the sounds. So we can really hear how this is affecting the whole group. Let's remove the compressor, remove the limiter, and add a more obvious sounding effect like a filter. And let's playlist. So now I'm affecting the whole group. Scroll to the right, same way as adding effects at sound level, group level. Add a beat delay. And you can start doing the same thing. So sounds, individual sound slots. Groups is all the sounds contained within that group, so all 16 sounds or up to 16 sounds. And then we also have master. So I've got 2 groups here. Group A, which I've muted, I think. So let's play that again. So that's more drums. So 2 different groups. So I can add effects to both of those groups together by adding them at the master level. So you click group sound, group, and then master. So I can go to the master level now, and I could add a limiter, for example. And now it's going to add that effect to all the groups. If I had 16 groups in here, it's going to add it to all of them because they're all being routed into the master. So add another effect, maximizer. So that's at master level. So it's important to just get familiar with that hierarchy system. I guess the sound level is the sound slots, you know, your individual sounds, whether it's one-shot sample, instrument, or a bass patch or a synth patch. And then you've got the group level, that's all the sounds contained within that group. And then you've got the master level, which is going to affect all of the groups. So whilst we were diving around, I mentioned obviously we've got samplers loaded in, triggering all these one shots. And we access the plugin instance by clicking on this plugin button here. However, if we go to the Shift plus plugin option, we can of course add effects as I mentioned previously, but we could also change the source sound. So I could load in a drum synth here. I loaded it in. There we go. Pad sound slot 5. So I could load a drum synth, or go back and go, I don't actually want to load an internal sound. I want to load something from the Native Instruments synthesizer library, or my Native Instruments synthesizers. So I can load an instance of Massive in here. And it just loads. It sounds like it's got effects on because we've got effects at the group level. So bypass that. Yeah, so I can load the Massive synth in there, as well as obviously when you browse and you can load instruments, it's going to load a preset. Whereas this way of loading, go back to our sound level, it just loads it in its initialized state. So it's just an empty patch really, or as if you'd loaded it up fresh, FM8. It just loads up the empty patch. And of course you don't have to, if you have other synthesizers loaded up here. So I could go ahead and load up Sylinth if I want, and it'll probably load up when you load up Sylinth in its initialized state.